In this episode, we're going to make user authentication feel like a clear, practical barrier that you can reason about, rather than a confusing mix of passwords, codes, and pop-ups that people tolerate. Authentication is simply the process of proving that someone is who they claim to be when they try to access a system. In payment environments, authentication is one of the most important control points because attackers often prefer to log in like a normal user instead of smashing through technical defenses. If they can steal a password, trick someone into approving a login, or abuse weak account recovery, they can enter the environment without setting off obvious alarms. Strengthening authentication is about reducing the odds that the wrong person can successfully impersonate a legitimate user. It is also about making sure legitimate users can access what they need reliably without creating unsafe workarounds. When we say only the right people in, we are talking about building a trustworthy front door and making sure the keys to that door are hard to steal, hard to copy, and hard to misuse. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. The first idea to get comfortable with is that authentication is a chain, not a single moment. A user signs in, but then they may stay signed in, reuse sessions across services, reset passwords, recover accounts, or change devices, and each step can be a new opportunity for someone else to slip in. Beginners often focus only on the password prompt, but attackers frequently target the weakest link in the chain, which is often account recovery or session handling. Strengthening authentication means you look at the full life cycle of identity, including how accounts are created, how passwords are set, how changes are approved, and how access is removed when it is no longer needed. If any one part of that life cycle is loose, the whole authentication story becomes less trustworthy. This is why good authentication is as much about process as it is about technology. The goal is to remove easy paths that let an attacker become someone else. Passwords are still common, and understanding their limits is crucial for beginners. A password is a shared secret, and shared secrets are vulnerable because they can be guessed, stolen, reused, or tricked out of someone. Even strong passwords can be exposed through phishing or data breaches from other services, and many people reuse passwords across sites without realizing how dangerous that is. Strengthening authentication includes improving password quality, but it also includes recognizing that passwords alone are rarely sufficient for high-impact environments. You also have to think about how passwords are stored and handled by systems, because weak storage practices can turn a compromise into a credential leak that affects many users. Another subtle problem is convenience-driven behavior, where users store passwords in unsafe places or share them because access is difficult. So strengthening authentication is partly about making the safe path workable, so users do not feel forced into unsafe habits. This leads naturally into multi-factor authentication, which is one of the most effective ways to reduce the risk of stolen credentials. Multi-factor authentication, MFA, means a user must prove identity using more than one factor, such as something they know, something they have, or something they are. The key idea is that even if an attacker steals one factor, like a password, they still need the other factor to get in. For beginners, the important takeaway is not that MFA is magical, but that it changes the economics of attack. It forces attackers to do more work and increases the odds that suspicious activity will be noticed. However, it is also important to understand that not all factors are equal in strength and reliability, and the way MFA is implemented matters. If the second factor can be easily intercepted, tricked, or approved by accident, the benefit shrinks. So strengthening authentication includes choosing strong factors and using them in a way that resists common attacker tricks. One of the most common attacker tricks involves social engineering, where the attacker relies on human behavior rather than technical weakness. For example, an attacker might pressure a user to approve a login prompt they did not initiate, or might convince support staff to reset an account using weak verification. Strengthening authentication includes hardening the human-facing parts of the system, especially recovery and support processes. Account recovery is often the soft underbelly because it is designed to help legitimate people who are locked out, and attackers love paths designed for emergencies. A strong approach requires clear identity verification steps and limits on how quickly recovery can be used to change access. It also involves training support teams to treat recovery as a high-risk action, not a customer service convenience. For beginners, the lesson is that authentication strength is not just about cryptography. It is about how people are allowed to regain control of identities when something goes wrong. Another important concept is privileged access, because not all accounts carry the same risk. An administrator account can often change configurations, create new users, access sensitive data, and disable controls, so compromise of that account can be devastating. Strengthening authentication for privileged users is typically stricter than for ordinary users because the blast radius is larger. This might mean stronger factors, more frequent re-authentication, tighter session controls, and more careful review of who has privileged access at all. Beginners sometimes assume administrators are trusted so they can have looser controls, but high trust plus high power is exactly what attackers exploit. The safer pattern is to treat privileged actions as special and to require stronger proof and stronger logging. When privileged authentication is strengthened, attackers lose one of their most direct paths to controlling the environment. Session management is another area where authentication can quietly weaken after a strong initial login. Even if a user authenticates securely, a session that lasts too long or can be reused in unsafe ways can become an entry point for an attacker. For example, if someone steals a session token from an endpoint, they might be able to act as the user without needing the password or second factor again. Strengthening authentication includes designing sessions to expire appropriately and requiring re-authentication for sensitive actions. It also includes protecting session tokens and ensuring they are not exposed in logs or transmitted insecurely. Beginners often think in terms of logins, but attackers often think in terms of sessions, because sessions are the active keys that unlock systems. If you treat sessions as valuable secrets and control them carefully, you close a common gap between strong login and weak ongoing access. You also need to consider how authentication works across multiple systems, because modern environments rarely have only one login point. Organizations often use centralized identity services so users can access many systems with one set of credentials. This can be a security advantage because it allows consistent policies, consistent monitoring, and easier removal of access when someone leaves. But it can also be a risk if the central identity becomes a single point of failure. Strengthening authentication in a centralized world means applying strong policies at the identity core and ensuring high-value systems require appropriate factors and controls. It also means thinking about how trust is established between systems, because a weak integration can bypass strong requirements. For beginners, the core point is that authentication is rarely isolated. It is an ecosystem, and the overall strength depends on the weakest integration and the most permissive policy. Account lifecycle management matters because the right people in also implies the wrong people out. When someone changes roles or leaves an organization, access should be removed promptly, especially in environments where sensitive data exists. Dormant accounts and forgotten service accounts are common entry points because they are rarely monitored and sometimes have outdated security settings. Strengthening authentication includes controlling who can create accounts, verifying that new accounts are legitimate, and reviewing existing accounts for necessity. It also includes disabling accounts that are no longer needed and ensuring privileged accounts are tightly tracked. For beginners, it helps to see that identity is not just a list of users. It is a living system of access that must match the real organization. When identity drifts away from reality, attackers find opportunities in the gaps. Monitoring and alerting are the final support beam for strong authentication, because even good controls cannot stop every attempt. You want visibility into failed logins, unusual login times, unusual locations, repeated prompts, and changes to authentication settings. You also want alerts when high-risk events occur, like MFA being disabled, a password being reset, or a new device being registered for a privileged user. These signals help detect account takeover attempts early, often before the attacker can do meaningful damage. Beginners sometimes imagine monitoring as a separate security function, but for authentication, it is directly tied to confidence. If you cannot see authentication events, you cannot detect patterns that indicate compromise. Strong authentication plus good monitoring turns identity into a defensible boundary rather than a blind spot. As you pull all these ideas together, strengthening user authentication becomes a disciplined approach to proving identity and defending the front door over time. You treat authentication as a life cycle that includes sign-in, sessions, recovery, and account changes, because attackers target whichever step is weakest. You improve password practices, but do not rely on passwords alone for high-impact access, because shared secrets are easily stolen and reused. You use MFA thoughtfully, choosing factors and processes that resist common social engineering tricks and reduce accidental approvals. You apply stricter requirements to privileged access, because compromise there has the widest impact. You manage sessions and account life cycles so strong login does not degrade into weak ongoing access or forgotten accounts. And you support it all with monitoring so suspicious behavior is seen and acted on quickly. When these pieces work together, only the right people get in, not because you hope they do, but because the system is built to make impersonation difficult and visible.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.